Hi, Tony and I want to welcome you to our study in the parables. We're on our third lesson on the parable of the unforgiving servant. That can be found in Matthew chapter 18. One of the things we've asked you to do is to read Matthew 18, and I hope you have. What Tony and I are going to do is we're going to go through this chapter, and she's going to take some verses and pose them to me as a question. I'm going to give some answers. The best way, though, would be for you to pose those questions to yourself and answer them. So, Tony, let's get started.
Verses 1 through 5. Who is the most important kind of person in God's kingdom?
Jesus brought a little child in front of him. He said, if you have the humility of this little child, you'll be most important.
According to Jesus, how serious is the problem of sin?
Good question. It's as serious as being drowned in the sea or having your arm or your foot cut off.
How does God view people who are sinners?
Well, he sees them as lost sheep who need to be rescued.
How should the church respond to people who have turned away from living the Jesus kind of life?
The church is to be responsible and accountable. And we should take the entire chapter of Matthew 18 as our counsel for how to work with them.
Are there any limits to the act of forgiveness?
Well, we've been talking about living the Jesus kind of life. That's a phrase I've picked up from Dallas Willard. Jesus kind of life is a life like Jesus lived. And if we live that life, it will be unlimited.
What does the parable of the unforgiving servant have to add to the message of Matthew 18?
Well, there are some words that jump off the page at us as we study this. Accountability, responsibility, mercy, and forgiveness. And they all combine together for a very balanced approach for dealing with people.
In what way is God like the master in the parable?
Right. Well, God is like the master in that he has compassion. It's very interesting. There's a huge debt that is owed, and God doesn't care about his being paid back from that debt. So the master said out of pity, released him and forgave the debt. Jesus came to show us that God is compassionate. He revealed God. In fact, compassion is one of the four major themes of Jesus' message. However, saying all of that, God's also the judge. God judges the things that keep us outside of his kingdom or cause us to reject his kingdom. And he does it not because he's angry with us or because he's a vengeful God. He does it because he knows that those are the things that will break our lives and make them miserable. In verse 46, there's the phrase about the torturers in that story. And God doesn't have torturers. That's part of the exaggeration that Jesus used for his parable's sake. However, saying that, God takes very seriously the fact that we live according to the principles that are outlined in Matthew chapter 18.
Is God bound by the unlimited forgiveness message of verses 21 and 22?
Okay, just so we have this, Peter came to Jesus and he said, Jesus, do I forgive my brother 7 times? And, for a lot of us, that'd be a whole lot. And Jesus said, no, not 7 times, but 77 times, which in that numerology, that's unlimited forgiveness. So the question is God bound by that? Well, we need to know that grace and compassion are parts of God's character. We just recently studied the Psalms, and in Psalm 103 is a couple of verses that I think are so important. Psalm 103, verses 13 and 14. As a father has compassion for his children, so the Lord has compassion for those who fear him. For he knows how we were made. He remembers that we're dust. God knows who we are. He knows what's happened to us. He knows all the circumstances of our life. He is compassionate. That being said, God is a judge. If God were not a judge, there would not need to be the remedy for sin, which was the cross. So if you want to know how strongly God considers our sin, look at the cross. That will tell you, if that's the remedy, our sin is really problematic. God is always ready to forgive, but it has to be received.
Does the parable teach a form of works righteousness which argues that the forgiveness of others is a precondition for divine forgiveness?
It's a great question. We Protestants are really concerned about works righteousness versus faith only. James has a good answer for us. James said, "So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead." And so our forgiveness of other people needs to be put in the light of just understanding behavior. Maybe take it away from theory. Let's just talk about behavior. Henry Blackaby said, "You can't go where Jesus is and stay where you are." And so if we don't forgive, we're staying where we are. Uh, this parable teaches us that we are to extend life-giving mercy to those people who have offended us and to help them. So that's where we need to be. Uh, just another note, this is where Jesus breaks with the Psalms. We read some Psalms that were really hard if you studied that with us, where the Psalm writer claimed to be righteous and yet said horrible things about their enemies. This breaks. And this is where we now need to adopt the life of Jesus and not the mindset of the Psalms. So what we want to do now is just make some applications. We're going to go through again the 18th chapter of Matthew. Tony's going to read a little bit, and I'm going to read a little bit. And we're just going to make some points, and I hope you'll think about these.
And this is taking a personal inventory. Do I seek the humility of the children in verses 1 through 5?
Right, right. And then for verses 6 to 9, do I cause people to stumble by the way that I live?
Do I take seriously God's desire to search for and restore people who have strayed from the Jesus kind of life?
Right. Then verses 15 through 20, am I able to speak God's truth to people's lives, to hold them accountable, and to do it in such a way that I also protect their privacy and hopefully regain the relationship with them?
Is my forgiveness unlimited, as shown in verses 21 through 22?
Right. And then the last thing with the parable, do I extend forgiveness based on the forgiveness that I've received? So thank you all for being a part of this. Tomorrow we're going to begin a new parable. It will be the parable of the two debtors, a little bit similar to this parable found in Luke chapter 7. God bless you. Have a great day. If you have a prayer request, send me an email, bspread49@gmail.com. Private message me on Facebook. We'll pray for you. We'll also ask our prayer team at Maywood Baptist. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.